All right, today we're going to learn about subtracting mixed numbers. So our learning goal is to use models, benchmark fractions, and equivalent fractions in order to subtract fractions and mixed numbers with unlike denominators. Vacation time. Caroline's family went on vacation for a week. They spent 3.5 days at the beach and 1 1/4 days at the museums. How much more of the week did her family spend at the beach than at the museums? Well, let's ask what's going on in this problem. Well, Caroline and her family, they spend some time at on vacation. They go to the beach, they go to the museums. It looks like they go to the beach for more time than the museums. What clues were given to you in this problem to tell you what operation to use? Well, I look at my question, which is how much more of the week did her family spend at the beach than at the museums? And I see a how much more than phrase or statement. And usually that means I have two different numbers that I'm going to be comparing and finding the difference between, because how much more than. So that tells me that it's going to be 3.5 minus 1 1/4. So how can we use models to solve this problem? Well, let's take a look. We have 3.5 modeled here at the top, and we have 1 1/4. And the first thing I recognize, and the first thing that should pop in my mind is look at my denominators. Do I have same size pieces? In this case, no, I do not. I have halves on top and fourths modeled on the bottom. Don't forget to change the fractions to have like denominators or same size pieces. So we can do that by making equivalent fractions. We can split these halves into fourths. And now we see that we have 3 2/4. 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4. And we have our 1 1/4. So now we need to subtract the 1 1/4. So right down here at the bottom is showing my 1 1/4. But I'm going to subtract it from the model at the top. So I'm going to subtract my 1/4. I like to subtract my fractions first, just in case I end up having to get into a situation where I might need to regroup, and we'll get into an example of that in a moment. So I have my 1/4 that I'm going to cross out or subtract, and then I need to subtract, 1 whole. So my 1 whole that needs subtracted. So I'm going to cross that off here. And so what I'm left with is 1 plus another 1 whole plus 1/4, and that gives me 2 1/4. So, her family, getting back to the original problem, her family spent 2 1/4 more days at the beach than at the museum. So let's skip ahead to this problem here. Jimmy and his friends ate pizzas after the game Friday night. On Saturday, Jimmy saw that there was 1 1/8 pizzas left. He ate 3/4 of the pizza for lunch. How much pizza was left? Okay. So let's see here. He's not starting with a whole pizza. He's starting with 1 1/8 pizzas, and he eats 3/4 of the pizza for lunch. How much was left? So I'm subtracting 1 1/8 minus 3/4. And so the first thing I notice, I do not have same size pieces or like denominators, and so I need to change my fractions to have like denominators. So I notice the fourths. It's always easier to take larger pieces or smaller denominator and make more pieces out of them. So I'm going to take my 3/4 and create an equivalent fraction of 6/8. So I can do this by drawing a model, or I can use multiplication. I know that if I multiply 4, my denominator of 4 by 2, it will give me eighths. But whatever I do to my denominator, I also have to make sure I do the equivalent to my numerator. And so I get 6/8. So this can be rewritten as 1 1/8 minus 6/8. Okay, so let's see what this looks like in a model. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Okay, so we have our 1 whole, and we have our 1/8. Okay, so we're going to make this into eighths. We'll make it into fourths, and then make each fourth into half. Let's use a different color to shade it in. So there's my 1/8, and there's my 1 whole. Now I need to subtract 6/8. I don't have 6/8. I only have 1/8. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to look to my one whole. It's just very similar to when we regroup with whole numbers and subtract with whole numbers. We need to take from a larger place value and break it up and regroup it with a smaller place value. So what we need to do now is break apart or regroup our whole fraction into eighths, because we need pieces. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do fourths, and then I'm going to split each fourth in half. And so now my one whole has been changed into 8/8, and I still have my 1/8. So technically speaking, if I add those together, I have 9/8 now minus my 6/8. Okay, now I can subtract that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6/8 have been subtracted, which leaves me with 3/8. And if you did the math here, you would get the same thing. We know that when we subtract, add and subtract fractions with like denominators, we do not do anything with the denominators. We simply focus on the numerator. So 9/8 minus 6/8 equals 3/8. So getting back to the problem, after Jimmy ate the pizza on Saturday, there was 3/8 of the pizza was left.